There is so much drama surrounding the Las Vegas Raiders heading into Sunday's matchup against the Denver Broncos. Denver's been in this position before. They must avoid falling into that trap if they hope to come away with a win on Sunday. We'll break that down and much more here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantly orange.com. Thanks once again, Broncos Country, for tuning in, making us your first listen, being an everyday listener here of the show. We appreciate you so much. Subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast so you never miss out what's going on with your favorite team. We get you covered every single day, all year long. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. What you can expect on today's episode of the show. This is the final game preview leading up to Sunday's matchup against the Las Vegas Raiders. The Broncos losing 8 straight games against them. Can they snap that streak here finally? That's on the table here. But more importantly, there's a lot of drama surrounding the Raiders. Can the Broncos avoid falling into that trap here this week with all the stuff going on with them? And on top of that, what are the keys to victory? How is Denver going to find a way to grind out a win against the Raiders in an AFC West showdown? And more importantly, what are 3 matchups that will define the outcome in this game on Sunday? That's where we're going to break it down with. Sayre, let's kick off with 3 matchups that we feel like will define the outcome in Sunday's game here. You can look at offense, defense, across the board. There are going to be some big matchups that Denver's going to have to win in terms of their one-on-ones or position groups in order to come away with a victory on Sunday.
Well, and it starts with typically in these matchups, Cody, we talk about Pat Surtain going up against Davante Adams, although Davante does indeed, according to Diana Rossini, have a hamstring injury that's expected to sideline him 1 to 2 weeks here, just enough time to maybe get traded to the New York Jets. So even with the Raiders having 2 games on the schedule, Cody, I know the New Orleans Saints were on the schedule here in a couple weeks. It looks like Davante Adams may effectively be ducking Pat Surtain. So now our attention turns to who is Pat going to be shadowing, if anybody, in this game. I was talking to your boy Q on the Crossover Thursday episode, and he said that the Raiders utilized some of their speedy receivers to kind of get some horizontal movement for the offense. So that's going to be interesting to see how the Broncos combat against that, because I know that they've given up some big plays via penalty downfield. You and I were just kind of chatting about Riley Moss off camera, a couple of penalties called against him versus the New York Jets there. So that's going to be an interesting matchup, even without Davante Adams, the wide receivers going up against Denver's corners.
Yeah, and I think primarily, until Davante Adams is officially ruled out, right? I know there's the speculation there until he's officially ruled out. This is how Sean Payton's also preparing, because he told a story about how DeMarcus Ware one time when he was coaching the New Orleans Saints and they're getting ready to play the Cowboys, had DeMarcus Ware was on the injury report, didn't participate, not expected to play, and all of a sudden he comes out and he plays and wrecks the game for you. Obviously, if Davante Adams somehow plays, Pat Surtain will line up on him. But if Adams doesn't play, which it seems to be trending that way, Jakobi Meyers is the next biggest receiving threat that you have to account for, because really last year when the Broncos played the Raiders in that first game, especially at home, PS2 put the clamps on Davante Adams, but it was Jakobi Meyers who had his way with Denver defensively. I know he was going against Riley Moss now and had that, not Riley Moss, Damari Mathis had that back shoulder touchdown throw. Not much you can do against that, but Jakobi Meyers has emerged into a very, I'd say, under the radar type of impact playmaker at the wide receiver position there for that offense. And then you have to account for the running backs out of the backfield. But I think PS2 versus Jakobi Meyers, that's probably going to be what we are going to see. Former Bronco Tyreek McAllister, a training camp darling, preseason darling, made the switch from running back to wide receiver. A little bit interesting to see that kind of play out there. So I think he on the depth chart is listed as the backup there to Davante Adams outside of Jakobi Meyers. So interesting. I mean, you mentioned the speed presence. That was obviously something that is a factor there. I think the biggest thing here, though, Sayre, defensively, is that front 7 against Zamir White, Alexander Mattison, the run game there of the Las Vegas Raiders. Granted, that Raiders O-line, they're banged up right now. They got some injuries that they're dealing with. But last year, the story was a little different. Week 1, right? It was really the Broncos trying to slow down Josh Jacobs, and they did just that. But then in the week 18 regular season finale, Zamir White gets to start. Zamir White runs all over the Broncos in that game. And so I know it's a little bit different in terms of how things are trending. Denver's defense is drastically different. And when you look at the tail of the tape, it certainly suggests that the Broncos defense against the run, they're allowing 110 yards per game. They're ranked 12th right now in the league, but the Raiders rushing offense right now, almost dead last, 31st in the league, 76.3 yards on the ground per game. I feel like this is a different look for Denver this year, and I'm not as worried about stopping the run as I think I have been in the past.
Yeah, well, to your point, Cody, about guys being banged up on the Raiders' offensive line. I mean, as of the injury report in the midweek, Colton Miller, Thayer Munford, Dylan Parham, all of them DNP early in the week with not just like, non-significant injuries. I mean, we're talking about knee, we're talking about Achilles, things like that, as well as even the guy that you just mentioned, Zamir White. He was limited early in the week with a groin injury. So this Raiders team is banged up. They've got a lot of different things going on. So this is an opportunity, as I think we're going to talk about over the course of this episode, like the Broncos really needing to impose their will. We talked about that with the defensive line going up against the Jets O-line last week, right? Where, hey, that Broncos D-line, you need to set the tone immediately. It doesn't matter if the Raiders have practice squad guys out there or backups out there, or if their starters end up playing. This Denver defensive line needs to impose its will from the very beginning of this game in order to win. And I think on the flip side of that, Cody, you look at the Broncos offensive line going up against this Raiders defensive front. We've talked about this throughout the week, but these two teams, the Broncos and the Raiders, they're tied for third in the NFL at 64% pass rush win rate through the first 4 games of the season. And that's with Max Crosby not playing last week against the Cleveland Browns. I think Deshaun Watson had his hands full with a number of other guys, including Charles Snowden, Tyree Wilson. So there's talent on that Raiders defensive front, including Christian Wilkins, who is their big money free agent acquisition. So it's really a strength on strength here, or what should be a strength on strength, right? Because the Broncos have invested a lot in their offensive line. The Raiders have invested a lot in their defensive front. I think obviously now when you look at the Broncos pitching 2 shutouts in a row with no sacks allowed in 2 straight games, this is a huge matchup and could be the determining factor in whether or not your offense is going to have success in this game.
No, I agree. And look, trying to counter that defensive line, the linebackers, I mean, they have corners outside of Jack Jones who made a business decision not to tackle and got called out by Antonio Pierce. They do come up and they tackle. This game has always been physical, right? AFC West, these teams dislike each other. Cortland Sutton in the week going into it saying, like, you got to throw back jerseys. Like, I'm not going to. It would have to take a very special person for me to ever part with a jersey to a division rival, right? Into the Las Vegas Raiders. I know Broncos Country loves to hear that. In terms of getting the run game going, Sean Payton even acknowledged that as well, on Wednesday when we met with him, talking about, hey, I feel like in the last 2 weeks, we actually have been able to get the run game going a little bit. So that's something that Denver certainly can build off of here coming into this matchup, because Denver's able to do that against 2 really good defenses, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and also the New York Jets defense. So now can they do it against, a defensive unit, the Raiders, if healthy, if Max Crosby does play, can they find a way to do that here on Sunday? That'll be a very, very important thing that will define the matchup here in Sunday's game. Obviously, kickoff slated for 2:25 p.m. Mountain Time, or 2:05. I think it's 2:05, one or the other. But it's going to be on Fox if you're not able to attend the game. So make sure you stay tuned for the Lockdown Broncos post-game report. I'll be back from the game with that. We'll break it down with Sayre here on the show. But in order for Denver to win, they're going to have to find a way to have balance on the offensive side of the ball. We'll dive into our keys to victory in Sunday's game here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode of the show is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off? Which ones aren't? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Once again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL. PrizePicks, run your game.
Winning divisional games is of the utmost importance. Sean Payton saying on Wednesday that he doesn't know any team that's gone 3 for 3 or worse in a divisional record and had any success in a season. So it starts with the Raiders here, the Broncos' first divisional matchup in week 5. What do they got to do to win? Cody and I have some keys to victory for the Denver Broncos here in week 5. Broncos Country, thanks so much for making us part of your day, however you choose to do so. And you know what? Thanks so much to the everydayers and all of you that make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. You know your boys, Cody and Sayre. We're going to be here for you every single day, rocking with you through the wins, the losses, the roster moves, the bye week. We're going to be here with the content no matter what every single day. So hit subscribe if you haven't already done so. Cody, let's talk about keys to victory, because I think that, Q and I went through some stuff. It's similar every week. When you talk about keys to victory, we all know you got to score more points than the other team. You got to outgain the other team. You can't turn the ball over, things like that. But I think there's stories within those points that you and I can maybe break down a little bit further here, starting with specifically in the Broncos context and what we've seen through the first 4 games, offensive balance being a huge key for this team getting a win at home on Sunday.
Yeah, I would say through the first 4 weeks of the season, right? I think we've seen a different story maybe in 1 out of the 4 weeks for Denver in terms of like Tampa Bay. I think the offense, you and I have banged the drum here really after the game. Like, this is how the Broncos offense with Sean Payton, Bo Nix is supposed to look. It's supposed to look like that. What we saw in Tampa Bay, weeks 1, no, definitely not supposed to be like that. Week 2, absolutely not. That was a rough outing for Denver's offense across the board. And then last week, it's so hard to really put into words how the offense could have been in rainy conditions like that. Like, that's certainly a factor. And look, I know a lot of people say, well, the Jets had to deal with the same stuff. Aaron Rodgers himself, for those that didn't listen to it, went on the Pat McAfee show and said that he even had a hard time. The offense had a hard time because of the weather. His grip on the football, he couldn't have that. Like, it was equal struggles there. So, you look so much in that. You look at the outcome of the game, Bo Nix was the only guy to throw a touchdown, right? Despite the 60 yards. That's not what Bo is. That's not what this offense is in terms of the passing game. So I think you have to get rid of that mindset that this is what the offense looks like. Bo's only going to throw for 60 yards, yada, yada, yada. Get that out of the thing. Like, it's all about balance, right? The weather conditions here this week in Denver, they're supposed to be beautiful at kickoff, and it's supposed to maintain. Like, in October, it's a little rare, Sarah, because usually it starts to get colder here in Denver. Well, we've had record days. Like on the 2nd of October, it was 90-something degrees, which is the hottest it's ever been, I think, in like over 100 years in Denver. So, and it's supposed to be up to 82 degrees going into next week. So the weather's going to be great for football, obviously on throwback day. But from this, it's like, how does Sean Payton come out with the offense here with Bo Nix and the run game? We saw it in that first half. Like, Bo Nix had 15 passing attempts in the first half compared to Denver only having 10 rushing attempts. In a rainy game like that, that should not necessarily be the case, right? So how is it going to be when you have sunny conditions? Could we see him just come up and unload in the passing game the way that they did against Tampa Bay? I'm not sure, but you have to come out and you have to establish some rhythm early on and just have balance between the run and the pass. And I would say less horizontal passes where you're throwing it behind the line of scrimmage and then guys are coming up and making tackles. Try to be calculated with the shots that you're going to take here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing Sean Payton kind of get a little bit more, I don't know if necessary. He doesn't like to talk about the confidence stuff, Cody, but I think in terms of the play calling and Bo Nix's willingness to throw the ball downfield, we're seeing a lot more of it since I think the second half of the Steelers game on, right? That's where we've really seen more so of like okay, I'm going to be willing to take these shots, or we're going to call these shot plays. And I think the Broncos, they don't need to get away from that just because we haven't seen them hit one to Troy Franklin, who's been open a couple of times, or Marvin Mims, who's been open a time or two, Cortland Sutton, where the timing just hasn't been there. We've seen them hit these plays as well, right? So the Broncos need to keep on doing that, because what I believe, Cody, there's a very direct correlation between the fact that the Broncos are taking these shots and willing to take these shots, and the run game finding a way to have some success these last two games. They've thrown the ball downfield quite a bit more these last two games. I know a lot of people like to say, well, Bo Nix on passes of 15 plus yards downfield is one of the worst quarterbacks I've ever seen in my life. And what it's done is open things up for Sayre Bedinger, 43-yard run, 70 yards on 9 carries in week 3. And then Javonte Williams, 77 yards on 16 carries in week 2. Jaleel McLaughlin averaging over 5 yards a carry against the New York Jets. Those shot plays help your offense, even if you're not hitting them. And of course, you want to hit those plays. You want to see better accuracy. You want to see better timing. You want to see the receivers go up and make a play. But dang it, if they're not helping out the offense, I think that we're seeing the evidence of that. So I think that it's really going to be about making sure you keep that going against the Raiders this week.
And I think one thing too, another key that I think will be imperative here with everything going on with the Raiders and their offense, like you look at the weekly release here and you look at the Raiders offensive output, they're the 24th ranked offense in the league. They're bottom 10, 288 yards per game. They're almost dead last, as we talked about, in terms of rushing the ball, 76.3 yards. You look at fumbles lost. They've lost 3. That's 23rd in the league. They've had 6 giveaways, 22nd in the league. And sacks allowed, 14. That's 26 right now in the NFL. Third down percentage, they're one of the worst. 32.7% of the third down attempts they get converted. That's 26th right now in the NFL. Despite all that, you still can't overlook the Raiders offense because Gardner Minshew has certainly had some good games against Denver. I know when he's a member of the Jacksonville Jaguars, I think it was week 4 of Vic Fangio's first season in Denver, the game where Bradley Chubb tore his ACL. Gardner Minshew was dancing around, making plays and throwing crazy no-look passes. You still can't overlook that. You look at, I think the biggest part of that kind of ties into this part here, Sayre, is the run game. Now, while it's obviously one of the worst run games right now through 4 weeks in the NFL, the Minnesota Vikings at one point last season when Denver was getting ready to play them on Sunday Night Football also had one of the worst run offense in the NFL. And Denver kind of overlooked them. And then one of the guys who was on that team actually broke off, had a really big game. So stopping the run. Zamir White banged up on the injury report last year against Denver, had 25 carries for $112. Alexander Mattison is a member of the Minnesota Vikings who really hadn't done much as the feature guy there. He had 18 carries for 81 yards against Denver last season, and Denver had a really hard time stopping him in that game. Luckily, they were able to find a way to win 21-20. So you can't overlook the Raiders offense because they're so down in the dumps right now. As we have seen, Sayre, in the NFL, it is a week-to-week show, and it could change at any moment. So Denver can't be saying, hey, you know, we got one of the best defenses in the league. We already know we're going to lock them down. You can't overlook the Raiders despite their struggles. That's going to be a big thing, and stopping the run is going to be a huge proponent of that.
Yeah, if they can stop the run, they can force the ball into Gardner Minshew's hands, and that plays into the biggest strength of your defense, which is getting after the quarterback. And the Broncos know that when they're getting after the quarterback, their defensive backs are making plays. The proof is in the pudding. Even next-gen stats, Cody couldn't get off the Pat Surtain train this past week with what he's been doing, the work that he's done in the first 4 games of this season. I mean, I think a lot of times Pat doesn't always get talked about enough on our show, or necessarily like when I'm writing stuff, Cody, I have to speak for myself because like when somebody's just that good, you don't talk about them all the time because you almost only have to talk about them if something goes wrong because Pat is that good. So I think he deserves his flowers for really helping this Broncos defense be as dominant as it has through the first 4 games of the season. Now, can they keep that up against the Raiders and a guy like Gardner Minshew, who, man, the Broncos were bringing the heat back in 2019, Cody. I remember there was a lot of pressure on Gardner in that game, and it was one of his first starts in the league, and he was out there running around making plays. So he's not to be taken lightly in terms of somebody that can escape pressure and work the pocket.
And I think if Denver is going to find a way to win this game, they're just going to have to stay focused, right? That's going to be the big key this week. Denver's obviously got some momentum, 2 games in a row. You go on the road on the East Coast, you get a win against an AFC opponent, you get a win against an NFC opponent. Well, now you have to take care of business against an AFC West divisional rival where, hey, it's throwback day. You're going to honor the 77 jerseys there. You're going to obviously, I think, honor Steve Foley, some Ring of Fame, and obviously some former alumni from that year. Well, that's going to be flying in. Like it is going to be an alumni feature here on Sunday at Empower Field at Mile High. There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of hoops to jump through. And the Broncos, they cannot fall into the trap. Denver, they've prepared to face the Raiders before when the Raiders have gone through some turmoil in recent memory, and the Raiders have found a way to rise above that. Can Denver avoid the same trap here on Sunday? We'll dive deeper into that here on today's episode. Locked On Broncos. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel. As you all know, FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And for week 5 of the NFL action, they're giving you an opportunity to win more. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats. You can view live play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. With the NFL season in full swing, week 5, it is here. The Broncos, they are 2.5-point home favorites against the visiting Las Vegas Raiders. Inside this matchup specifically, you can go through and you can do player props. Will Bo Nix throw a touchdown? Will Javonte Williams run for over 40.5 rush yards? These are things that you can all put together, and you can even combine them into a parlay so you can maybe stack your winnings there inside of the FanDuel Sportsbook app, or you can pick the morning slate of games on the money lines or the spreads. It's easy inside of the app. And you'll get started today with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Once again, when you place your first $5 bet, you will get started with $200 in bonus bets, all on FanDuel.com. Once again, check it out today. FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Distractions are a part of the National Football League, and the Las Vegas Raiders over the last handful of years have been part of plenty of those distractions, but it hasn't seemed to impact them negatively in the on-field standpoint and matchups following some of that turmoil. The Broncos, they've experienced that firsthand. Can they avoid that trap? We'll break that down here on today's episode of the show real quick. Once again, Broncos Country, thanks for making the show exactly what it is. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen or to watch us. Wherever you get your podcasts are available on YouTube. So make Locked On Broncos part of your day every single day. We appreciate you. Sayre, when all this stuff came out this week about Davante Adams requesting a trade, all the stuff going on with Antonio Pierce, even a couple of weeks ago, I started to think to myself, like, all right, I don't know what the storyline is going to be for Denver going into that matchup against the Raiders. But it seems like there's a lot of stuff going on for the Raiders. So how can Denver avoid stepping into that mess here? Once again, I go back to recent memory. It was when John Gruden had gotten fired. It was in the week leading up to kickoff against the Broncos, and Rich Bisaccia was named the interim guy. And, I think we had a lot of confidence before that game saying, okay, hey, like the Raiders, they're dealing with so much stuff right now that it may just be too impactful for them. Well, they were kind of galvanized by that. Rich Bisaccia led them obviously to a victory. Derek Carr was very effective here against the Broncos in that game. Not saying it's the same exact thing, but the Raiders have kind of been battle tested with a good portion of that roster of dealing with turmoil. And I think with all the drama going on, it's easy. I think from a on paper narrative standpoint, if you're the Broncos, to say, hey, they got so much going on, let's just go and play and we'll take it to them. You can't overlook the Raiders because of this distraction. And I'm hoping the Broncos avoid this trap that they have fallen into before.
You talked about stepping in the mess, Cody, or being the Raiders being a mess. So how about for the Broncos? Don't step in the mess, step on the throat, right? This is an opportunity to kick the Raiders while they are down, and you have to take advantage of that opportunity. I mean, I get there's gamesmanship. I'm not saying to go be dirty in this game or anything like that, but what I am saying is that you have an opportunity to kind of like take advantage of a situation here that there's no finality to just yet. I think that was one of the benefits that the Raiders had when they fired Josh McDaniels last year and they fired John Gruden last year, is that they all galvanized around something that had some finality. Right now, you're still in the midst of the mess. And so for the Broncos, you can't allow them to come in and this would be the first upset of the year for as far as the Broncos being favored in a game. This is the first game the Broncos are favored this year, according to FanDuel, 2.5-point home favorites against the Raiders. So it would be technically an upset for the Raiders. To avoid getting upset, don't step in the Raiders' mess and let them do their thing and get it all over your feet. Step on the throat and be the aggressor in this game. We talked about it from the defensive line of scrimmage perspective, but I think the same thing applies. Remember the mentality that they came out with against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and we're like, hey, we don't usually take the ball. Teams don't usually take the ball. You usually defer when you win the toss, but we want to take the ball. We want to go score first in this game. And then you force a turnover on the second possession. Like, that's the kind of thing that you want to see in this game. Step on the throat, take advantage of this early on, and keep your foot on the pedal throughout this game.
And I think that just goes to where Denver has to play their brand of football, right? Offensively, the identity is still very much trying to formulate and establish itself. And look, I would say a large portion of the offenses around the NFL don't necessarily have their identity established just yet, except those who are returning a lot of their main nucleuses from the last year or even 2 years ago. But for Denver, they're trying to figure out what their identity is. And it's going to be fun to watch. Like if it clicks, Sarah, it is going to be fun to watch because I think we have seen flashes of what it can be. It is Denver offensively with their O-line imposing their will with the physicality led by Quinn Miners. And I think that you have to carry that into that, like getting the run game going and having a guy like Javonte who's not afraid to lower his shoulder, run through somebody. That's big. Like Denver has to find a way to get that going. But I would even say defensively, that mentality this year is drastically different than what it was last year because you have dogs on the front line, you have dogs at linebacker, you have dogs in the secondary, and then there's like this common buy-in from all 11 players on the defense, and even the guys that are rotating in saying, hey, our job is to go out there and smash you in the mouth. And that's, I think it carries over. John Franklin Myers has that mentality. The outside linebackers with Jonathan Cooper, Nick Bonito, Zach Allen, they have that. And then you have guys rotating in that embody that same exact thing with Malcolm Roach and even Jonah Ellis, Dondre Tillman. So for me, I think that the defense is like, hey, we want to come out here and smack you in the mouth. That's got to be the brand of football that Denver has here. Look, granted, it's an AFC West divisional game. The stakes are always higher here. But I think that Denver's defense has maintained this mentality from week one all the way to now, and that's who they think they're going to be for the rest of the season. I love that. Play your brand of football, be smart, and obviously get off the field in certain situations. I'm excited to see how this game's going to formulate, right? Because the writing is on the wall a little bit here. Denver has a chance here in the month of October to hit their stride because the schedule, Sarah, it doesn't get any easier. Look, you're going to play the Raiders this week. You can play the Chargers next week. Like, you know how big it would be for this team to have 2 AFC West wins early on in this season? And you obviously have it where you're, hey, not only just it's divisional win, but it's also a conference win, which at the end of the year, you find yourself in the dance the way that Denver was last year at one point of the season. Tiebreakers, they matter. They matter a big time here. But divisional play, Denver went 3-3 last year in the division. They've got to have a better record than that. You have 2 division games in a row. Then you have an NFC game on Thursday night against the New Orleans Saints. And then from that point, you have a little bit of time off. And then I think it's the Baltimore Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, Denver is facing a very tough schedule coming up. But, man, they can take advantage. If I'm not mistaken, they can take advantage and get some much-needed momentum that could change the landscape of how people view this team going through the rest of the season.
And this isn't the most important thing, Cody, but like, you can't lose wearing these throwback uniforms.
Oh,
like,
no.
Come on now. I mean, we're going to be looking so good out there in the throwback uniforms. You got Steve Foley coming to the game. And obviously these jerseys and these uniforms are emblematic of 1977. That's the specific year the Broncos are saying these are the throwback from. Like, we're talking about the Orange Crush, right? We're talking like I watched the Orange Crush on my Broncos history DVDs growing up, and I'm watching these guys like helping me fall in love with this team. This is a uniform that I know that there's not all the best memories for Broncos country, like a lot of lost Super Bowls, getting crushed in the Super Bowl, and being, kind of that team that was like the Buffalo Bills before the Broncos won back-to-back Super Bowls in the late 90s, like the team that this team can't win the Super Bowl, this and that and the other. These uniforms hold so much meaning to so many fans in Broncos country, Cody, and I think to come out there against a division rival like this wearing the Orange Crush uniforms, like, you can't lose in these uniforms, guys. So the Broncos need to be focused out there to win for the uniforms, man. Put on a show for Steve Foley. Put on a show for the guys out there that have crawled so you could walk today. Go out there and get a W in the best looking uniforms in the game.
I have to correct myself because I said it was the Saints, and then you have the Ravens and the Chiefs. You actually have the Panthers after that Saints game, and then it's the Ravens, Chiefs, Falcons, Raiders, and then the Browns, and then the bye. Like, Denver, this can be the most defining stretch of the schedule. And if Denver can suddenly click offensively the way that the defense has, this is going to be a very fun team to talk about here in the next 3 or 4 weeks. I'm excited about it. But it all starts with this week against the Las Vegas Raiders. Take care of business. Snap that 8-game losing streak that you have had, which also probably not being talked about enough. Sean Payton came in last year. The Broncos found a way to snap that ridiculous losing streak that they had to the Kansas City Chiefs. Now's the time to do it against the Raiders and build your own streak here going forward. With that said, Broncos Country, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show. We appreciate you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen. For your second listen, go check out Locked On NFL. But when Sayre and I, when you're going to hear and see from us next, it's going to be following Sunday's game against the Raiders. I'll make it back from the game. We'll sit down, we'll react to it, and hopefully we're talking about another Victory Monday coming up here on the podcast. Broncos, Raiders, obviously this Sunday on Fox. Check it out. It's going to be a jam-packed, wild ride. Hopefully Denver can come out on top. We'll see you for the post-game report.